The last recording my Aunt Lila ever left me was barely 40 seconds long. The wind was loud in the background, and her voice trembled like someone was standing just outside her door. If anything happens to me, don't trust your father, and don't trust anyone who stands beside him. For months, I tried to believe she was confused, afraid, maybe even imagining dangers that weren't real. But the morning I sat in the courtroom, those words returned like a cold hand on my shoulder. The room felt wrong. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong. Too quiet, too polished, too still, as if everyone inside already knew how this story was supposed to end, except me. My father was already watching when I looked up. Richard Hale, the man Harbor Point still calls a hero, the man who raised me with a steady voice, a strict hand, and a silence that always felt heavier than shouting. His expression didn't belong to a father fighting for justice. It belonged to a man protecting a secret. Beside him sat Judge Mason Crowley, old friend, old ally, old promise maker. They shared one quick glance. I wasn't supposed to see. Quiet, practiced, nervous. My father's lawyer stood first, his tone dripping sympathy, the kind meant to shape a narrative before the truth even enters the room. We're here because this young man has been misled. He does not understand the responsibility that comes with managing a legacy. We request full transfer of the estate to Mr. Hale, the rightful steward of his family's future. Family, future, words my father loved to use when he wanted to bury something deeper. People around me nodded quietly, already convinced. Aunt Lila's house, her land, her photographs. Everyone believed they belonged with him. Why would a son fight his own father unless he had something to hide? But I wasn't the one hiding. The warning in Aunt Lila's voice pulsed in my chest. Don't trust your father. I wasn't supposed to speak yet. But if I waited, I knew the truth would never surface. I stood, and the chair scraped sharply across the tile, breaking the courtroom's illusion of calm. Your Honor, I said, setting a single folder on the table. Before we continue, there is something the court needs to hear. Something about the night my aunt died. Something about my father. Something Judge Crowley already knows. The judge's face drained. My father's jaw twitched. A hush rippled through the gallery. Inside that folder was the first piece of a truth buried 25 years ago. A truth that began long before my aunt died. Long before the will. Long before this courtroom. And the part that will shock you most isn't what's inside the folder. It's why my father was willing to destroy everything, including me, just to keep it hidden. If you've ever felt danger hiding behind someone you were raised to trust, stay with me. And if life pulls you away, make sure you're subscribed so you can return when everything finally breaks open. Because the storm in that courtroom had only just begun. When I sat in that courtroom, staring at my father across the aisle, it was impossible not to think about the house I grew up in. From the outside, it looked like every other home in Harbor Point. White siding, blue shutters, flower boxes. My father insisted on watering at exactly 6 in the evening. Neighbors waved when they drove by. Kids rode their bikes past our driveway and called him Mr. Hale, with the kind of respect people reserve for uniforms and old stories. Inside, it was different. There were no family photos on the walls, no silly school drawings on the fridge, just plaques, certificates, framed newspaper clippings about Fire Chief Richard Hale, local hero. My mother's face appeared in a few of them, always at his side, always smiling. I used to trace her outline, with my finger when he wasn't looking, trying to imagine what her laughter sounded like. She died when I was 8, in a fire everyone in town still whispers about. The Harbor Point warehouse blaze. 23 minutes of chaos that turned my father into a legend and left me with a life measured in before and after. My father never told the story the same way twice, but one part never changed. If you'd listened to me that night, he would say your mother might still be alive. It didn't matter that I was a child. It didn't matter that I barely remembered what happened. His version became my memory, whether it was true or not. Or I learned early that our home had rules that didn't exist anywhere else. Shoes lined up perfectly by the door. Voice kept low after 9. Questions trimmed down to the bare minimum. My father didn't yell often, but when he did, the sound stayed in the walls for days. Most of the time, he didn't need to raise his voice at all. Disappointment from him was louder than anger. Stand up straight, Ethan. Don't mumble. Heroes don't make excuses. He said that last one so often, I started to believe that he expected me to become some smaller version of himself. Strong, controlled, untouchable. The problem was, I didn't feel like any of those things. I felt like a kid who was always in the way, walking through a museum dedicated to a man who still lived there and expected me not to touch anything. There was only one person who ever broke that spell. Every other Sunday, a dusty blue station wagon would pull up in front of the house, and my Aunt Lila would lean out the window with her camera hanging from her neck and a grin that made the air feel lighter. She was my mother's younger sister, the family's disappointment, according to my father. She never married, never settled, never stayed in one place long enough for people to pin her down. But somehow, she always made it back to Harbor Point. "Come on, kid," she'd say. "Let's steal you for a few hours." My father never liked it. He'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw working. "Don't fill his head with nonsense, Lila. He needs structure." She'd smile that calm, infuriating smile. "He needs air." Those afternoons with her felt like visiting another planet. She took me to the cliffs, to the old docks, to the edge of town, where the wind smelled like salt and rust instead of polish and smoke. She taught me how to hold a camera, how to wait for a moment instead of trying to force it, how to see the things people didn't want seen. "Every town has 2 stories," she told me once, as we watched my father at a memorial ceremony from a distance. "The one people tell in public, and the one that leaks out in small pieces when they think no one's looking." She said it softly, but her eyes were fixed on him. Back then, I thought she was just being dramatic. Artists talked like that, in metaphors and half-truths and shadows. At least that's what my father said. "Your aunt lives in a fantasy," he liked to remind me. "Your mother and I dealt with reality. Reality in our house meant his version of the past, told and retold until doubt felt like betrayal." If I ever asked about that night, about the fire, about why my mother had been at the warehouse at all, his face would harden. "We're not doing this," he'd snap. "You froze. She went back for you. That's all you need to know." It didn't matter that the pieces never fit together in my mind. I remembered smoke. I remembered sirens. I remembered my mother's hand leaving mine and the heat at my back. But I didn't remember freezing. I didn't remember causing anything. When I told Aunt Lila that one summer evening on her porch, she went very still. "What exactly did he say happened?" she asked. I repeated the story the way I'd been trained to tell it. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. Then she looked out at the water as if the horizon might offer her a better version of the truth. "Ethan, she said quietly. There are some things your father will never be able to see clearly. Some things he doesn't want to. But the night your mother died, it's not the way you've been told. I stared at her, my heart beating too fast. What do you mean? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet, she said. One day, when you're ready, you'll understand. Just remember, this the story everyone in town believes about your father. It isn't the whole story. Years later, sitting in that courtroom, listening to his lawyer talk about him like he was the only person capable of protecting our family's legacy. Her words finally made sense. The trouble was, by then, the truth wasn't just about a fire 25 years ago. It was about why my aunt had died, and why, in her last 40 seconds on this earth, she used them to warn me about my own father. I used to think Harbor Point was a place where nothing truly changed. The tides came and went, the gulls circled the pier, and the same old men gathered outside the bait shop every morning to argue about fishing seasons and weather reports. But the morning Aunt Lila died, even the ocean sounded different. I remember waking to a voicemail from the sheriff's office. Short, flat, detached, like they were reading a script they'd practiced too many times. There's been an accident involving your aunt. You should come down to the cliffs. Accident. Even now, the word still tastes wrong. I drove to her house faster than I should have. The sky was gray, the kind that presses down on your chest. The air smelled like wet stone. When I reached the cliffs, 2 patrol cars were already there, lights spinning silently. A handful of neighbors stood behind the yellow tape, whispering the way people do when tragedy approaches but hasn't fully settled. Officer Rayburn, an old friend of my father's, walked up to me with the kind of sorrow you wear when you don't know if you're comforting or lying. Ethan, I'm sorry. Looked like she slipped. Probably went out to take photos after the rain. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the torn earth near the cliff's edge, deep footprints, the impression of a knee broken branches on the shrubs. It didn't look like someone who slipped. It looked like someone who struggled. They didn't let me get close. Someone was still down there with her body. I only saw the corner of the bright orange rescue stretcher. That was enough. My hands went numb. The world pulled away from me like a tide rushing backward. Rayburn placed a hand on my shoulder. It happens fast out here. The rocks get slick. I nodded, though nothing inside me agreed. My aunt spent half her life on those cliffs. She knew every stone, every uneven patch of ground. She wasn't careless. She wasn't reckless. That was the thing about her. She always moved with purpose, even in the middle of chaos. As I was standing there trying to breathe, I noticed the sheriff's deputy carrying a cardboard box from her porch. He said it was miscellaneous belongings they wanted to secure before the storm rolled in. But the box was overflowing books, binders, film canisters, a camera lens I'd never seen her use, and something else I couldn't identify from where I stood, a metal lockbox with dents along the side, like someone had tried to pry it open. A chill went through me, sharp and immediate. Rayburn said, "She had a lot of clutter. We're just trying to keep things dry." But Aunt Lila didn't keep clutter. Everything she owned had intention, and she never left her equipment scattered in the open. She treated her cameras like living things. I asked when they found her if she had her camera with her. Rayburn hesitated. Not on her, not on the rocks either. Maybe it washed away, but the tide had been low, and her camera strap hung right there on the porch rail, dry, untouched. She never went out without it. Something inside me twisted. When they finally released me to go to her house, the first thing I saw was her boots by the door. No mud, No water stains, no sign she had worn them that morning. And her coat, the heavy one she always brought when walking the cliffs, still hung neatly on its hook. If she had really gone outside, why leave behind the things she always wore? Why leave without her camera? The sheriff's story began tearing at the seams. I stepped inside the living room, the place that had always felt more like home than the house I grew up in. Soft, yellow light through lace curtains, the smell of lavender and old books, photographs stacked neatly on the table, waiting for her to sort them. Then I saw it, an envelope on the mantel, addressed to me, my name written in her handwriting, the loop on the E as familiar as her smile. Inside was a single key, old, heavy, rusted at the edges, and a note. If anything happens to me, don't open this while your father still has a voice in this town. Keep it safe. Under the key was a small strip of photographic film, just 3 inches long, half of it exposed to light, half still intact. A face I couldn't fully make out, a silhouette beside it, and behind them, what looked like flames. My breath caught, my skin prickled. Someone had tried to tear the strip in half, but failed. I sat down on her couch, the same place she used to sit beside me, and edit photos long past midnight, and the weight of everything settled on my chest. Her last message, her warning, the missing camera, the footprints on the cliff, and this strip of film she clearly fought to protect. I didn't want to believe what it suggested, but deep inside, beneath the fear and the heartbreak, a truth I had never dared face began to rise. Whatever happened to Aunt Lila, it wasn't an accident. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if the warning she left me wasn't about grief, but survival. I didn't sleep the night after Aunt Lila's funeral. The house felt too quiet, too hollow, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. I kept replaying the day, her untouched boots, the missing camera, the strip of film someone had tried to destroy, and her final words, whispered like a secret she had carried alone for far too long. Don't trust your father. By morning, the sun broke through the fog hanging over Harbor Point, but the heaviness in my chest didn't lift. I drove to the law office that handled Aunt Lila's estate, a little brick building across from the lighthouse. I'd been told the will would be read privately, and for a moment, I hoped naively that my father wouldn't show up. But when I opened the door, he was already there, sitting straight, hands folded, wearing the same dark suit he wore to city council meetings. His expression unreadable. "Sit down, Ethan," he said, as if I were late to a family dinner. "We shouldn't drag this out." The attorney, Mr. Farnham, cleared his throat and opened a thin folder. His voice had the calm, steady tone of someone who's delivered enough bad news that it no longer shakes him. "Your aunt prepared a revised will 2 months ago," he began. "She left her home, her land, all personal belongings, and full rights to her photographic collections, to her nephew, Ethan Hale." My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Mr. Farnham continued. "In addition, she designated you, Ethan, as the sole executor of her estate. There are no secondary beneficiaries listed." Something in the air shifted. Not a sound, not a whisper, just pressure, like the room had shrunk around us. My father spoke softly, too softly. "That won't stand." Mr. Farnham blinked. "I'm sorry. That won't stand," he repeated, leaning forward. Lila wasn't in her right mind these past few months. She was forgetful, distracted. A will made under confusion is not legally sound. He was lying. I knew it. He knew it. And he knew I knew it. Aunt Lila wasn't confused, I said quietly. He turned his head eyes cold and sharp. Don't pretend you know more about my sister-in-law than I do. My voice cracked before I could stop it. She warned me. She left something. Enough! His voice cut through mine like a blade. But I didn't back down this time. There was a reason she changed the will, I said. And you know it. His face stilled. Not in surprise. In calculation. Before he could respond, the door opened and a woman walked in. Tall, dark hair, pulled back, a briefcase in hand. She moved with a kind of quiet confidence that made both men straighten in their chairs. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, offering her card to Mr. Farnham. Marianne Cole. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Abbott. She looked at me. Tissa and her nephew. I stared at her. I didn't hire an attorney. No, she said softly. Your aunt did. My heart dropped when, 7 weeks ago, she asked me to represent you in any matter concerning her estate. She said you'd need help. Her gaze settled on my father. She was very clear about that. The room froze. My father straightened, scoffing softly. This is ridiculous. My sister-in-law was unstable. She wandered at night. She misplaced keys. She forgot appointments. Marianne didn't blink. She never forgot to protect him. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break something inside him. His nostrils flared. His fists tightened. You think I'm going to let him take everything she built? He hissed. My wife's family's land. The property I maintained for decades. No, I won't. Marianne's voice stayed calm. It isn't your property, Mr. Hale. It's family, he snapped. No, she said quietly. It was hers, and she chose. For the first time, I saw something crack in my father's mask. Not grief, not anger, but fear. It flickered so fast, I almost missed it. But it was there. Fear of what? The will, the key in my pocket, the strip of film someone had tried to destroy, or the attorney who knew more than she was saying. Ethan, he said, turning to me, think clearly. This is too much responsibility. You're not ready. I almost laughed. For years, he said I wasn't ready for anything. Not ready to choose my own path. Not ready to leave Harbor Point. Not ready to ask questions about the fire that killed my mother. But Aunt Lila had trusted me with everything. Even the things she feared most. I'm keeping the estate, I said quietly. Something in his eyes hardened like a door slamming shut. Fine, he said. If that's how you want it. But don't blame me for what happens next. He stood, nodded curtly to the attorney, and left the room with strides too calm for a man grieving his sister-in-law. When the door closed behind him, Marianne sat down beside me. You need to understand, she said, your father will not walk away from this. That property, those photographs, they're not the reason he's fighting. I frowned. Then what is? She opened her briefcase and slid a brown folder toward me. Because she whispered, your aunt found something she wasn't supposed to. Something tied to the night your mother died. And your father knows you're about to discover it. The room felt suddenly cold. The folder felt too heavy. And, for the first time since Aunt Lila's death, I realized this wasn't a battle over a will. It wasn't about money or land. It was about the truth. A truth someone had been burying for 25 years. And that someone was my father. When I left the law office folder in hand, the waves at Harbor Point seemed quieter than usual. The gulls didn't cry. The wind didn't scrape the cliffs like it normally did. It was as if the whole town held its breath, waiting. I returned to Aunt Lila's house by the sea, a place I once visited only for Sundays, with a new purpose, to understand what she had died to protect. Inside the house, everything looked familiar, yet alien. The camera gear still in neat rows, the prints stacked like gentle memory, the scent of lavender lingering in the air like the echo of her laughter. I walked past her editing table and found a small black box, tucked beneath, locked. I tried the key she gave me. It fit. Inside, an envelope marked Exhibit A in her handwriting. A stack of photos. I pulled one out. It was of me as a child, laughing with her on the docks. Then, I found one of my father. His helmet off his back, turned, carrying a small metal canister on the night of the big fire. The timestamp in the corner, 11:47 p.m. My heart thumped so loudly, I half expected the print to jump off the paper. I turned the photo over, written in tiny script, Hail, 11/14/98, property transfer. Property transfer. The night my mother died, the night everyone said was tragedy, no fault. Something inside me clicked. Next, an image of Judge Mason Crowley at a fundraising gala, hand in hand, with my father, holding up a check, smiling at the camera. But under the camera flash, you could see someone in the mirror, behind them a shadow, leaning over an open safe. The reflection, small and almost invisible, but unmistakable once my eyes focused. I heard a scrape in the back door. My breath froze. The house had always felt safe with Aunt Lila in it. Now it felt like a trap. I tucked the photos into a manila folder and stepped outside, dragging my boots across the wooden porch. The air chilled. I traced the footprints, the recently disturbed sand, beside the foundation. 2 sets, one large, heavy boot, one smaller bare. They led toward the cliff's edge, where the moonlight, weak though it was, revealed a darker patch on the rock. It looked like a stain, maybe oil or solvent. My mind raced. The dune grass rustled behind me. I turned, found no one. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I climbed back inside, locked the front door, then slid the prints across the table toward the folder of photos. My phone buzzed with a message. Stop digging. He knows. No name, no ringtone, just icy words. My father, or someone on his side, someone who had been watching. I sat at the editing table and watched the stack of photographs again. Each image told part of the story, but only when placed in sequence. Each photo, a fragment of a timeline no one ever talked about. Over the next hour, I laid them out on the floor. The early morning fire at the warehouse, 2 a.m., shot from across the bay. My father carrying a canister minutes before the blaze. The community rally next day. My father in front of the camera, smiling, giving a speech. The photograph of Judge Crowley behind them. Safe, open money exchanged. The pattern emerged. Hero, fundraiser, judge. All part of a chain. A network. A cover-up. I pulled out the film strip Aunt Lila had given me. I held it up to the light. The burned section matched the corner of the warehouse. The intact segment showed a shadow of someone lowering that canister. I scanned the image a dozen times until I recognized the shape my father's silhouette. I leaned back, stunned by the realization the fire was an accident. The lawsuit wasn't about a will. It was about silence. My phone buzzed again. We're watching. Stop now. I looked at the message, then looked out the window at the empty house across the quay. The windows were dark, no movement, and that's when I knew I was on my own. There was no ally in the room, not even the person I once called father. That night, I decided I'd take the photos to Marianne. She would know what to do. But as I walked out, I saw a black pickup truck parked at the end of the driveway, engine idling. I slipped around the house and dropped the folder inside my jacket. I watched the men inside the truck light cigarettes, laugh quietly. One held up his phone and turned it toward the house. I ducked before the flash. I felt the house behind me shift, the floorboards creak, as if the walls were sighing in relief that I was gone. I ran to my car, the folder safe in the glove box. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The truck followed, and in that moment, I realized the war had begun, no longer just against my father, not just for the estate. This was about the truth and the price of exposing it. Aunt Lila once said, "The second story always costs more than the first." I understood it now, because the next move would change everything, and I would either take it or they would bury me with the truth. The morning of the first hearing, Harbor Point felt strangely still, like the town itself was waiting to see which story would survive the day. The courthouse sat on top of a hill, old red brick and tall white columns, the same place where my father had been praised, honored, and practically worshipped over the years. But when I walked inside, the air didn't feel like a place of justice. It felt like a stage built for a performance I was never invited to rehearse. People turned as I entered. Some nodded politely, some whispered, and some, mostly the ones who had served under my father's command, looked at me like I was betraying him, simply by showing up. I took my seat at the defense table beside Mary Ann. She placed her hand lightly on the folder of evidence we'd spent the night organizing. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, steady and calm, told me she knew what we were up against. Then the door behind the bench opened. Judge Mason Crowley stepped out. He walked with that slow, confident stride of a man used to being applauded. His robe hung perfectly, his expression unreadable. But when his gaze shifted to my father, sitting proudly at the plaintiff's table, his jaw relaxed, and a flicker of familiarity warmed his eyes. It was the first sign the outcome had been rehearsed long before I arrived. Case of Hale versus Hale, the clerk called. Those words alone felt like a wound. My father rose, as if he were making a speech at a town banquet. When he turned to the audience, I knew he was about to play a part he had practiced for decades. "Your Honor," he began, voice trembling with perfectly measured grief. "I never imagined I'd find myself in a courtroom, standing against my own son." A murmur rolled through the room, a wave of sympathy aimed straight at him. He continued, "My late sister-in-law was a wonderful woman, but in the final months of her life, she became unpredictable, confused, vulnerable." He glanced toward me. "She was manipulated, influenced, and in her confusion, she left her entire estate to my boy, here, who sadly lacks the maturity to manage something of that scale." I felt the sting of those words, not because they surprised me, but because of how easily people nodded along. He went on weaving the story, like silk, about duty, family honor, responsibility. He even wiped away a tear that I'd swear didn't exist a moment earlier. Then, because every performance needs a climax, he delivered the line meant to destroy me. "I am not here for myself. I am here to protect my late wife's memory, to protect our family's legacy from being handled by someone who isn't ready." My stomach nodded. He wasn't protecting her memory. He was burying the truth of her death deeper than before. Judge Crowley leaned forward, nodding with the empathy of a man who had already made up his mind. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. Your devotion is noted." The attorney beside my father, Mr. Langley, stood next, smooth, polished, clearly prepared to dismantle me piece by piece. "Your Honor," he said, "the respondent has no background in finance, no stable career path, and no track record of managing assets. Further, he has demonstrated erratic behavior following Ms. Abbott's death, showing paranoia, distrust, even alleging that others are watching him. These are not the actions of a sound-minded executor. He paused for effect. I move for temporary transfer of the estate to Mr. Hale until this matter is resolved. My father lowered his head, pretending pain, pretending worry, pretending love. I felt the courtroom folding around him like an embrace. Marianne slowly rose. Your Honor, before this hearing proceeds, I must object to the implication that my client is unstable. He is grieving, and grief is not a disorder. Judge Crowley raised a hand. Noted. But continue quickly, Ms. Cole. We have a full docket today. He didn't even look at her. She breathed in, then placed 3 photographs on the evidence table. Ms. Abbott was not confused, she said. She was preparing to expose something connected to the plaintiff, and we intend to show. But she was interrupted. Langley shot up. Your Honor, these photographs were not filed. This is ambush evidence. Crowley's gavel struck once. Strike these from the record. We will not allow surprises today. Surprises. This entire courtroom was a surprise I never asked for. Marianne tried again. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Ms. Abbott was threatened before her death. Enough, Crowley snapped. We are not here to rewrite tragedies or chase fantasies. And then, without hesitation, without shame, without even pretending neutrality, he turned to my father. Mr. Hale, you may step outside while I review the temporary order. My father placed a hand on his heart in mock humility, nodded gratefully, and walked past me with a look I'll never forget. A look that said, "You're already losing." When the judge returned, he didn't draw out the moment. Until the matter is further reviewed, full temporary control of Ms. Abbott's estate will be granted to the plaintiff, Richard Hale. The room erupted in soft approval. People leaned in. Some even smiled at him. My hands went cold. My thoughts blurred. Marianne leaned close and whispered, "This isn't the end. Their confidence is the first crack." But I didn't feel cracks. I felt walls closing in. My father walked back in, stopping beside my table, just long enough to whisper, "You should have listened to me, son. You never were ready for the truth." And I understood something then. He wasn't fighting for the estate. He was fighting to bury something in it, something that could burn him, something he feared more than losing me. And I was closer to it than he ever wanted me to be. I didn't go home after the hearing. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Harbor Point didn't feel like Harbor Point anymore. Instead, I drove straight to Marianne's office, a narrow building wedged between the post office and the old diner. Inside, the lights were dim, the blinds half drawn, and a pot of coffee had burned itself into a bitter scent that made the room feel strangely tense. She sat at her desk, flipping through documents with a focus that looked almost too calm. "We need to move fast," she said. Before I even sat down, she opened a thick binder, filled with photocopies, old reports, clipped, articles, faded photographs, the kind of paper trail no one expected to ever see daylight again. "You asked what your aunt discovered," she said. "Now I can show you." She slid a file toward me. Fire incident, 11/14/98. Harbor Point, Municipal Storage Warehouse. My mother's name was on the second page. My father's on the third. My throat tightened. I flipped through the report slowly. At first, everything matched the town's version. Electrical malfunction, rapid spread, poor visibility. But then came a section I'd never heard mentioned handwritten addendums from an investigator named Samuel Reed. "Who's Reed?" I asked. Marianne leaned back. The only investigator who didn't bow to the department's pressure. He was removed from the case. Early. Removed for asking questions. She pointed to his notes, and my entire world paused. Fuel residue suggests accelerant used near south wall. Witness reports seeing an individual exiting back door prior to ignition. 'cause not consistent with electrical fire. The witness, Aunt Lila. My chest hollowed. She called the station at 11:39 p.m. Marianne said, "Your father was first responder on the scene, but Reed's timeline shows he was already there before the fire began." I stared at the timestamps. They matched the photos in my jacket. "He told everyone he was home with me," I whispered. "He said he got the call late." Marianne's eyes softened. "I know." I gripped the edges of the file knuckles pale. "But why would he? Why would she? Why did nobody say anything?" Marianne pushed another document toward me, far older, stamped in red ink. "Property transfer agreement. Harbor Point Municipal Storage. Signed by Judge Mason Crowley and Fire Chief Richard Hale." 1 week before the fire, she said quietly, the town planned to sell the warehouse land to a private developer. But there were irregularities, embezzlement suspicions, missing funds. If the deal went public, several careers would have ended, including Judge Crowley's. "And my father's," I whispered. "Yes, and my mother." She hesitated. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look entirely steady. "Your mother," she said, "found out. She was there that night for a reason. She wasn't just at the wrong place at the wrong time. She knew something was happening." The room tilted. My pulse thudded like a drum. "She was trying to stop them," Marianne continued. "She called your aunt. Lila drove down to meet her. They were both inside when the fire started. Inside. Not trapped. Not lost. Inside because they were trying to warn people. But," my father said, "I know what he said." Her voice sharpened just a touch. "But his report contradicts every independent note. And the original case files were sealed by Judge Crowley." "For how long?" 25 years. Exactly as long as I had been alive. I leaned back, breath thin. Memories I spent my entire life relying on suddenly felt like fragile glass cracking at the seams. "Why would he blame me?" I choked out. "Why tell me that I froze? That it was my fault?" Marianne's face filled with a sadness that made me look away. "Because guilt," she said softly, "is the easiest leash." My eyes burned. She slid the final piece of evidence toward me. An audio file on a small recorder. "Your aunt made this the night before she died." My blood ran cold. "Play it," I whispered. Her voice filled the room, shaky, breathless, speaking faster than I'd ever heard her. "Ethan, I finally know what happened the night your mother died. Richard wasn't rescuing her. She was trying to warn people. He wasn't inside to save her. He was inside to stop her. I saw him, Ethan. I saw him leave the building alone before the flames went up. Before—" She paused, voice breaking. "Before she could get out." The recording cut abruptly. Silence swallowed the room. My heart felt too heavy for my chest. My breath trembled, and the walls seemed to close in. "She confronted Judge Crowley right after she made that recording," Marianne said quietly. "And the next morning, she was gone. Gone. Like the fire 25 years ago. Another tragedy wrapped neatly in an official story." I pressed my palms against my face. "It wasn't an accident," I whispered. "It wasn't a tragedy. It was a cover-up." Marianne nodded. "And your father has been fighting this estate because he knows what's hidden inside it. Evidence Lila collected over years. Evidence powerful enough to destroy him. And Judge Crowley." I stared at the folder, then at the recorder. Aunt Lila's voice still echoed in the air. Her strength, her fear, her last warning. "Then we expose him," I said quietly. Marianne exhaled. "That's exactly what we'll do." But something in me knew if the fire hadn't killed the truth 25 years ago, the people who lit it would not hesitate to ignite something worse now. And the courtroom, the same courtroom that had silenced me earlier, would soon become this place where every lie my father built finally burned. The day of the final hearing arrived with a sky the color of steel, too heavy, too still, the kind of sky Harbor Point only sees before a storm. I parked farther from the courthouse than I needed to, not because I was avoiding the people gathering on the steps, but because I needed to feel the ground beneath my feet before stepping into a room where nothing had ever belonged to me. Not the truth, not the narrative, not even my own name. Marianne walked beside me, carrying a single leather case. Inside it, every photograph, every document, every scrap of evidence Aunt Lila had risked her life to preserve. "Whatever happens in there," she said softly, "you're not alone." I nodded, but my stomach churned. The warning in Aunt Lila's recording hadn't stopped echoing since the night I heard it. I saw him leave the building alone before the flames went up. The courthouse doors groaned open. The gallery was full neighbors, former firefighters, old friends of my father's, people who had grown up loving the myth of Chief Hale, the hero who lost his wife in a tragic fire and raised a son alone. They all turned when I entered, some with pity, some with judgment, some with curiosity sharp enough to cut. My father sat at the plaintiff's table, in his pressed navy suit, back straight, chin lifted just enough to project dignity without arrogance. The man could have been carved from stone, unshakable, immovable, certain of his place in the world. Judge Crowley entered from the door behind the bench robe, flowing eyes fixed straight ahead. But even from across the room, I saw the stiffness in his jaw. His face was too pale, his movements too controlled. He knew what we carried. He knew today might be the day the past crawled out of its coffin. The clerk called the case. Crowley cleared his throat. "Let's proceed." My father rose instantly, gesturing with a confidence that made even the wooden floors seem to listen. "Your Honor, I stand here simply as a father, trying to ensure my late wife's family legacy is preserved. My son, bless his heart, is overwhelmed, misguided. He's fallen under the influence of outside forces." His eyes flicked briefly toward Marianne. Gasps and nods whispered through the room. He continued, "I do not wish to accuse him of anything. He is grieving, confused." But Ms. Abbott was erratic before she passed, and her will was clearly made under emotional stress. "I only seek what's best for my family." He placed a hand over his heart. "My wife would have wanted this." A lump formed in my throat, not because his words hurt, but because I knew how many people believed them. Crowley turned to Marianne. "Your response." She rose slowly, calmly, almost gently. "Your Honor," she said, "my client's father is correct about one thing. This case is about family, but it's also about truth. And today, we bring the truth forward." She opened the leather case. At that moment, Langley, the attorney my father hired, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object. We were not given discovery of these materials." These materials, Marianne said, without looking at him, were sealed 25 years ago by this very court, unlawfully. Crowley stiffened. Before he could respond, Marianne laid the first photo on the evidence table. A murmur rippled through the gallery. It was my father, standing behind the warehouse, holding a canister minutes before the fire that killed my mother. Crowley's face drained of color. My client's Aunt Marianne said, her voice unwavering, captured this image on the night of the fire. The original investigator, Samuel Reed, noted accelerant patterns inconsistent with electrical malfunction. His report was suppressed. She placed the second photograph. Crowley and my father at a fundraiser, the open safe behind them, money exchanging hands. The gallery tensed, and the transfer of the warehouse property, she continued, was arranged by Judge Crowley and Chief Hale days before the fire. A fire that conveniently destroyed records of ongoing financial misconduct. Crowley's gavel slammed. "Ms. Cole, this is outrageous." "No, Your Honor," she said, unflinching. "This is evidence." Then she pressed a button on the recorder. Aunt Lila's trembling voice filled the room. "Ethan, I know now. Richard wasn't rescuing her. She was trying to warn people. I saw him leave the building alone, before the flames, before she could get out." The courtroom fell into a silence, so thick it felt like the air itself froze. My father shot to his feet. "That recording is a lie." Marianne looked at him calmly. "Lila recorded it less than 24 hours before her death. She was unstable. She died the next morning after meeting with you," Marianne said. "And Judge Crowley." A wave of gasps. Crowley's face collapsed inward. Years of control cracked open. My father snapped. "You don't know what she was going to do," he shouted. "You don't know what she would have ruined." And then the slip. The moment the mask fell completely. She should have stayed out of it. She should have never come back. The room stopped breathing. He realized too late what he'd said. His mouth closed. His chest heaved. But the truth had already escaped. Judge Crowley's hand shook on the bench. His voice barely functioned. "This court calls a recess." But Marianne stepped forward. "No, Your Honor. We move for immediate recusal and dismissal, and for all evidence to be turned over to state investigators. This is no longer a civil dispute. It is obstruction, conspiracy, and potential homicide." Crowley didn't argue. He couldn't. 25 years of buried truth had risen, and there was nowhere left to hide. He whispered barely audible motion granted. The gavel struck. My father sank into his chair. Lips pressed into a thin line. Not anger, not even fear, but the look of someone who finally knows the story is no longer his to control. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter, something heavier. Freedom, the kind that comes only after the truth finally speaks louder than the lies built to bury it. When the gavel fell for the last time, the courtroom didn't erupt the way I imagined it would. No shouting, no accusations, no angry whispers, just silence. A silence so complete, it felt like the whole town was finally exhaling after holding its breath for 25 years. My father didn't look at me when they escorted him out. He didn't plead. He didn't apologize. He didn't even fight. Behind all the years of discipline, the perfect posture, the medals, the speeches, there was just a man who had spent half his life running from the truth and the other half pretending the lie was love. Judge Crowley resigned that afternoon, and for the first time in my life, the stories Harbor Point told about its heroes began to shift. Not loudly, not spitefully, just honestly. People approached me on the courthouse steps, neighbors, old teachers, firefighters, who once saluted my father. Some said they were sorry. Some said they had always felt something was off, but never knew what to do. Others just squeezed my arm quietly, the way people do when words feel too small. Marianne handled the reporters. I couldn't. I drove to Aunt Lila's house instead. The cliff winds hitting my face like a baptism. The sea roared below, steady and ancient, whispering the same truth Lila always tried to teach me. The world doesn't hide anything forever. Her house was just as she left it. Warm, lived in, safe. I walked to her desk and opened her last journal, the one she never let anyone else read. Between entries about weather and camera lenses and birds along the shoreline, one sentence was written again and again in different corners of the pages. Truth doesn't heal what it breaks, but it keeps the wound from turning into rot. She must have known I'd find it. She must have known I'd need it. I don't know if exposing my father healed anything. Some wounds don't close neatly. Some betrayals don't fade with the seasons. But something did shift inside me. For the first time since I was 8 years old, I stopped blaming myself for the fire, stopped believing the story he carved into my memory, stopped carrying guilt that was never mine to carry. The estate is officially mine. Now, her home, her photographs, her work. I'm restoring her darkroom. I'm archiving every roll of film. I'm opening a small exhibit next spring, one she always said she'd build when she finally stopped wandering. I guess now, it's my turn to bring her work home. Some afternoons, I stand at the cliff's edge and feel her beside me, steady, patient, unafraid of the truth. The waves crash against the rocks below like applause, like closure, like the sound of something finally letting go. I don't know what comes next, but I know this. If you've lived through a family lie, if you've carried shame that someone else planted on your shoulders, if you've ever been told a version of the past that doesn't sit right in your bones, you deserve the truth too, even if it's painful, even if it changes everything, even if it breaks what you thought could never break. Because sometimes the only way to rise is to let what burned finally turn to ash. And if you've stayed with me through this entire story, I hope you'll take one moment to subscribe. Not for me, but so you don't walk alone the next time someone else's truth needs a witness. We all deserve to know what really happened in the moments that shaped us. And sometimes, the truth is the only thing strong enough to set us free.